Hi everyone! Welcome back to my channel. Today we are talking about all the books that I managed to read in the month of May, and there are a couple books here that I technically did not read in the month of May, but I'm including in this wrap-up because they were a part of a secret video project that I was doing that got posted in May, so I haven't been able to actually talk about these books in any wrap-ups before, so I wanted to make sure to feature them in a wrap-up, give you my thoughts just in case you hadn't watched that vlog that I did. It was reading Polarizing Books, so I will link that down below if you want super in-depth thoughts on the first 3 books I'm going to talk about in this wrap-up, and then we'll get to the books that I actually managed to read in the month of May, which wasn't a lot. It was 3 with 1 DNF. And there are a couple reasons behind that. If you didn't already see the video before this with my June TBR and an announcement, I did have my baby in the month of May, which was unexpected. It was the best surprise ever, but very unexpected, quite early. So that being said, did not actually manage to finish a couple books I was in the middle of towards the end of the month. And then with my job, I do get a great maternity leave, but leading up to that maternity leave, I originally thought going into the month that I'd start kind of rolling off of projects, getting projects transitioned to other folks, and kind of have like time to start winding down before my maternity leave. And unfortunately, it kind of worked out in the opposite direction, where because I was going out on leave so soon, I was trying to get so much wrapped up, and things were so chaotic and escalated at work with so many of my projects that it ended up taking a huge toll on my mental state this past month. So I actually did not have the ability with my mental state to focus on books outside of work because I was so anxious about work right up until the day I had my baby. So that was really unfortunate and very unexpected. So that is the reason behind why this wrap-up is not quite as long as my wrap-ups typically are. The fact that I did manage to finish 3 books though, I'm still proud of myself for that. I still think that's great. So let's start talking about the books. Starting with the 3 books that I didn't actually read in the month of May that were a part of that Reading Polarizing Books vlog. The first, I'm going to go in the order of my enjoyment here. The first is The Maidens by Alex Michaelides. This one I was enjoying enough through most of the book. I had some issues with characters and how they were behaving, and just really like unrealistic, in my opinion, like unrealistic situations that characters were getting in. And then there was like a niece character that just drove me nuts. So there were like a couple things that were bothering me throughout this book that I was like, oh, maybe this is why it has such mixed reviews. But I was intrigued enough by the mystery going on. If you don't know, this story follows this woman who is a group therapist, and her niece goes to this school where there is a murder of her niece's best friend. And so she comes to kind of console her niece and gets into a situation where she is trying to figure out who ended up murdering her niece's friend. And it was just, again, the mystery was fine. The characters were a little irksome, but then the ending, what was that? What was that ending? Absolutely not. No. So I was like, no, this is one that I overall gave it a 2 because I was so intrigued the majority of the time. It did keep me turning the pages, but that ending did not work for me at all. Absolutely not. So this is one that I have a hard time recommending. It does have such mixed reviews where some people love this book and some people are like me that don't really love it. So it's kind of one you have to try for yourself. And unfortunately, it's not one where you can kind of like figure out if it's going to be for you or not based on, you know, the first half, like another book I'm about to talk about. Like, this is one where, like, the ending is either going to really bother you or you're going to be okay with it and like it. So it's hard to recommend. I personally don't recommend it, but that's just me. A lot of people love this book. So I did not like The Maidens very much. You can see even more detailed thoughts in that video vlog. All right, so the next book that I read for that video was The Atlas Six by Olivia Blake. And this is one, it needs no introduction. Everyone I feel like has heard of this book. It's so hyped. It's one of the most hyped books I've read ever. This is one that for me, I had such conflicted feelings on. I didn't dislike this book, but I didn't love it. And I'm very much in the middle where there was something about it that I couldn't look away from. These characters, you're really following 6 main characters who are brought into this competition, and they are, each of them have different kind of magical capabilities, and they're supposed to be some of the strongest magicians in the world. And each character is so distinct, but all of them are very, very pretentious and arrogant and flawed, some more than others. So they're not the most likable cast of characters, but I couldn't look away. It's like when you start watching like a reality TV show where you're like, these people are not great people, but I can't stop watching. It's like that. I don't know how else to describe it. So I ended up liking, for the most part, this book, but I don't know if I would continue on with the series. I probably won't. But I do find myself very much looking at this book like, I actually did really like a lot of components of this. So I liked the writing, even though it was super pretentious. I liked the character work, even if they were flawed characters. The part of the book that really falls short is the world and the plot. Like, there really isn't a ton of plot going on outside of these characters interacting with each other and having these conversations with each other and aligning themselves with each other. And there isn't a lot of world building. Like, you really don't have a good grasp on what's going on outside of these 6 characters competition. Like, no kind of indication of like how magic interacts with the rest of the world, how having magicians in the world makes it different than our world. Like, none of that is explored, and I would have liked that to have been explored a little bit more. So anyways, I gave this a 3.5 stars. I did not know how to feel about it. I was very much mixed at the end. Like, I was intrigued by you, I liked you, but something held me back from really loving this book. So that's The Atlas Six. And then finally, I read Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. So this is one that, again, I heard so many mixed things about. And then another one where, kind of like The Atlas Six, the thing that carried me through this book was the characters. I absolutely love Gideon as a character, and I love Harrow as a character. The writing style, I think the writing style itself is not super confusing or complex. It was very easy to turn the page. However, the plot is what was totally confusing. You really, I don't know how to pitch the plot of this book to you. And the cast of characters is quite large, where every house is represented and every heir to the house has their own bodyguard. So it's quite confusing trying to figure out like who belongs to which house and which house represents which thing, and then which bodyguard belongs to which heir. It's all very kind of convoluted and complex. However, I think that this one, upon a reread, would be amazing. Now that I've read this all the way through, I would love to reread this. And now that everything's kind of revealed itself in terms of like what the plot is, who's behind what, it would be really fun to go back and reread this. So I really enjoyed the characters. I really loved the humor in this book. The writing style itself was fine. It was the plot that was so confusing that held it back from being a favorite for me. Those are the 3 books that were featured heavily in that vlog that I've linked down below. Now let's talk about the books that I actually finished in May. So I don't have a lot to talk about with you. Let's start with the DNF. And unfortunately, I was really bummed by this. So the DNF is Paradise 1 by David Wellington. Oh, I hear baby crying. Hold up one second. Hey, I have a friend who joined me. So where was I? I thought Paradise 1 was going to be super similar to Dead Silence by S.A. Barnes, which is a sci-fi horror novel that I read last year that I really enjoyed. And unfortunately, this is sci-fi horror, but the problem is the type of horror that it is not my favorite. The problem with this one for me was it was very much action-packed, turn the page, but without really what felt like any depth to it. Like the characters were super surface level. I really didn't care about the characters at all. The action itself it's fine. I don't read sci-fi or I don't read horror for like action scenes. So I just found myself really not interested at all in what was going on in this one. So that was really unfortunate. And then I saw some other reviewers talk about the ending. And so when I saw those reviews come out that the ending is basically a non-ending and it just kind of stops, I was like, oh, thank goodness I DNF'd it, because I feel like going through 700 pages and then not getting an actual conclusion. Oh my, would be extremely frustrating. So yeah, this one just was not for me. And then let's see, which one do I want to talk about next? Let's talk about The Bone Shard War by Andrea Stewart. This one I was really anticipating because I love The Bone Shard Daughter so much. That is one of my favorite fantasy books. Love that book. The second book was not my favorite. I remember reading it and being slightly disappointed. It was still like a good time, but it just was not the same kind of magic that first book was. And so I was really anticipating the third book because I was kind of hoping it would kind of reignite my like love for the series, and unfortunately it didn't. I still stand by that the first book is 5 stars, amazing, incredible, but I think the series as a whole for me is a 4-star series. It's not an all-time favorite. I think the reason being, what I loved so much about the first book was the incredibly cool magic system and the horror elements. And very much it felt like this genre-bending fantasy novel where it mixed in these horror elements and it mixed in these sci-fi elements, and it did it in such a cool way. And then there was like such a cool mystery and reveals and like what is going on, and you find out and you're like, what? And so the rest of the series, the first book ends in a place where you don't have any of that in the following books. Like the magic system kind of goes away. The mysteries kind of get figured out for the most part. There's a couple still that you find out some reveals for. And then like the genre bending aspect of it kind of goes away as well. So it feels much more like feels more familiar after the first book when you get into the second and third. And I didn't love the characters. I like them, don't get me wrong, I really like them, but I didn't love the characters enough for them to like carry me through like loving the rest of the series without like that cool stuff from the first book. And then for this particular book, I was a little frustrated with how it felt quite repetitive for some of the character arcs. Like our two main characters do things or think things, and it feels like they're thinking the same thing over and over. It feels like they're doing the same thing over and over. And there's like a side quest type subplot going on in this book that I was like, what are we doing here? This seems strange. So there were things that I just didn't love, but the ending itself, I do really like. I really liked where we ended up with all of our characters. So I thought that the ending, like the very, very end, it did stick the landing for the series as a whole, but getting to that ending was not my favorite reading experience. So I ended up giving this 4 stars. I will say I was reading this at a time where, again, like I talked about at the beginning of the video, I was super anxious at work. I carried a lot of that anxiety into my personal life outside of work. And so I was trying to read this and trying to focus on it as much as I possibly could. But at times it was really hard to. And that definitely affected my reading experience. So I could totally see myself rereading this series when I'm in a better place and loving it potentially and feeling differently. But for me, like this first reading experience, it definitely didn't do anything to help me escape what was going on in my personal life. Like it didn't do a great job of, transporting me, let's say. So for that reason, it can't be a 5-star, but maybe if I ever revisit the series, my feelings will be a little bit more positive. The next book I have to talk about is Misery by Stephen King. This was my audiobook that I listened to in the month of May, and it wasn't a super long audiobook. I just found it was hard to find time to listen to audiobooks for some reason. I really loved this. It's not my favorite Stephen King. It felt a little dragged out for what it was, but I really, really enjoyed it. My experience was probably a little biased because I've seen the movie and I love the movie. Kathy Bates in this role is unbelievable. So the whole time I was listening to it on audio, I just had like the movie playing in my head, that Kathy Bates performance in my head, and was really enjoying it for that reason. So that definitely, I think, affected my reading experience in a more positive way, where I really enjoyed this book because it was bringing me back to watching the movie. The book itself, it goes into a lot more depth and backstory and all that, and it was really, really entertaining. It's not my favorite thing ever that I've read from Stephen King or from the horror genre, but it was so good. It was so good. The character work in this book is incredible. So I highly recommend Misery. It's a good one for wintertime. All right, and the last book, and by far my favorite book of the month, that's got to be Tyrants Throne by Sebastian de Castell. This was 5 stars, and this now solidifies the Great Coat's place in my top 10 favorite fantasy series of all time list. So you'll see an updated list this year. I'm sure I'll film that video soon-ish, maybe, we'll see. But Great Coats is going to be there, and I just loved this. It does everything that I loved about the previous books, and for me, what makes the series so special is the characters and their bond with each other, and the twists and turns are so much fun. The action scenes are so much fun. I am not one for action scenes, but the way Sebastian de Castell writes sword fighting scenes is unreal. I'm like fully invested, fully there. Every step that these characters are taking, every swing of a sword, I eat it up. I love this. The writing style is so great. Like, it just is so easy for me to fall into the story and get lost in the pages. And I just love the characters so much. So I love the Great Coats. This last book was so like bittersweet. Like, there were some really emotional moments, some high highs, some low lows. It wasn't quite as, let's say, gruesome maybe as some of the previous books. I think that some of the previous books have really, really dark scenes, and there wasn't too much of that in Tyrants Throne, but there was some emotional stuff going on in this book, and how it ends for our characters was just so appropriate, and I loved it. I thought it knocked it out of the park. I really wouldn't change anything. So yes, I love this book and I love this series, and I highly recommend that you check out Grey Coats. And I will say the first book is, I think, the weakest in the series, and I think it just takes off from there. But even the first book I gave 4.5 stars, so I still loved it. So if you love the first book, you're gonna love the rest of the series. If you liked the first book, okay, I think you're gonna love the rest of the series. It's so good. It's so good. So very happy I finished off that series this month. So those were all of the books that I managed to read in the month of May. What did you think? Did you see any books that you've read before? What did you think of them? And then what was your favorite read from the month of May? Leave those comments down below. Thank you all so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you'd like to, and I will see you all in my next one. Bye!